Hey guys, welcome to Peripheral Vision, and today we're taking a look at the Sega Dreamcast. And what a fascinating system the Dreamcast is. Released in 9999, the Sega Dreamcast is paradoxically both a success and a failure. But before we get into all that, let's just take a look at the hardware itself. On top we have what is one of my favorite logos. I love the Sega Dreamcast logo, the very simple and memorable squiggle there, which leads down into an indicator light showing if the system is on or off. And I like how the lid connects to that light to create a triangle. It's just a nice little touch. The power button, which unfortunately there's no reset, so you have to double click the power to reset the system. And the open button, which just opens the lid. On the back we have our generic ports. We have the AC out, which is interesting because this is a generic AC. You can actually find these in random places all over. In fact, if you have a PlayStation power supply, it will also connect to the Sega Dreamcast. Serial port, AV out, and then we have the line, which is a port for the built-in modem, because the Sega Dreamcast has a built-in modem. And that's actually really important because the Sega Dreamcast is the first system to use a built-in modem to connect to the internet, and it was very much a trailblazer for that. And one of the big games that utilized this was Phantasy Star Online, which just to this day people still use in local LAN parties and stuff like that. And that's fascinating. That has a legacy like that. That it's the first one. Unfortunately, internet wasn't that widely used, so the built-in modem wasn't able to be utilized to the fullest possible extent. My words are great. And on the front, we've got good old 4-person local multiplayer, and this is one of the three systems that use it. The PS2 was the only one that didn't use 4-person local multiplayer, and it still stomped everything. But the 4-person ABCD, and real quick I'll show you the controller that connects to that, the controller that comes bundled with the system at least. We've got this large and in-charge controller with analog triggers, analog joystick here, and some slots for VMUs or video memory units. And it is a great system for local multiplayer. There's a lot of cool fighting games, a lot of cool party games, but we'll get to those in the game section. And that's it for the hardware. Now, what was I saying before about this being both a success and a failure? Well, first off, let's take a look at the failure aspects of it, because there are two big things that caused the downfall of the Dreamcast, and those were the two P's: piracy, PlayStation 2. Now, if this system were to exist in an environment where it just had the GameCube and the Xbox to deal with, I think it would have done better, but the PS2 just destroyed everything. Nintendo and Xbox had brand recognition, but and Sega did too, to an extent, but this just couldn't hold up in a PS2 era, because the PS2 was much more powerful as far as processing, as well as it had the ability to play DVDs, so that was one of the things that put the nail in the coffin for the Dreamcast. The other thing, piracy, people figured out, let's open it up and I will show you. This is Sonic Adventure, and these are GD-ROMs, which stands for Gigabyte ROM. So there's a gigabyte worth of storage on here, which is a little bit more than the average CD. It's a little bit more than the PlayStation, I believe. And this is the type of disc that they used. And people figured out that you could actually burn games, the Dreamcast games, onto CDRs, 700 megabyte CDRs, and they did, because free games, people will always take that up, and people still do it to this day. If you get a Dreamcast, you can have functionally a free library if you have the app or the program to download and decode them and just burn them onto a CD. So those two things put together were really the downfall. And unfortunately, the Dreamcast only lasted about 1.5 to 2 years, which is a criminally small lifespan for a console, unfortunately. But that's not really important, because even though it didn't succeed in its day, and even though this was Sega's swan song, this was actually the last Sega console before they became a major third-party developer, in history's eyes, the Dreamcast was a success, because it's kind of just an awesome system. There's a lot of great games for it. It's, from an aesthetic standpoint, really well designed. I really like the look of this. But it's just a great little system. In fact, people are still making games for this today. They're using the same technology that people use to burn copies of the regular games to create homebrew Sega Dreamcast titles. And to this day, excluding the homebrews even, there's a library of over 700 games for the system, which is like ridiculous. Like that dwarfs a lot of major video game consoles. Like the N64, this almost doubles, I think, the N64's game library, which is crazy. But yeah, so in the eyes of history, people love the Dreamcast. People love the game library. People love all the interesting things that it did. Unfortunately, it just was ahead of its time, and unfortunately, that can kind of curse you in the gaming market. So that's it for how it succeeded and failed. So what about the games? The big mamma jamma, everything everyone wants to know about the games. Fascinating, actually. The Sega Dreamcast game library is so large and so interesting, and let's talk about the regular releases. The Dreamcast is a great system for you, especially if you are a fighting game fan or a shooting game fan. Oddly enough, there were no EA games. I don't give a crap about EA, so I don't care. But this is one of the very few video game consoles that had no EA releases, so that's an interesting factoid. But Capcom loved the crap out of the Dreamcast. There were a ton of really interesting the Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, or Marvel X-Men versus Street Fighter came out on this, which was the beginnings of the Marvel versus Capcom franchise, and there was a bunch of entries in that. There were also a bunch of shooters that Capcom made for the system. And as far as Sega's main team, obviously they had, like I said before, the Sonic Adventure, which was the launch, and they had Sonic Adventure 2 for their Sonic stuff, but they had a lot of really much like the Sega Genesis, the Dreamcast had an innovative library of games as far as its Sega-based titles. They had things like Seaman, Typing of the Dead, Shenmue, which was actually one of the most expensive games ever made at the time, and a theme that you'll see with the games is that a lot of them utilize interesting peripherals. These control ports were not just for controllers. There was a lot of things, like Seaman utilized a microphone controller, one of the first people to do that, and there were a bunch of light gun games. And for Typing of the Dead, there was actually a keyboard-based controller, which is something I'm looking to get my hands on eventually. And yeah, a lot of interesting ideas. Sega were great. Their main team was fantastic at developing interesting and innovative games, and they got a lot of cool third-party support. And altogether, I'd say the Dreamcast is a system absolutely worth owning. Like, it's the system, even when I was a hardcore Nintendo fanboy and I didn't really care about having these Sega systems, I wanted to have a Dreamcast because I knew that it was a great system. So, yeah, that's it for and if you want to pick it up, it's very cheap, actually. It's roughly, I got this one for $20. It perfectly working condition, all the stuff, 2 controllers. That's a little low for the average, but you can pick one up, a full set for $30 pretty much anywhere nowadays, and I would highly recommend it. Go ahead, and I won't advocate piracy, but if you want to check out some some interesting games and maybe go buy the actual copies, you know what? It is it is an option for the system. So, awesome system, highly recommend it, and as always, later days.